What did your teacher do that you didn't realize until you were older was faked up? After the Columbine incident, schools started to have all sorts of procedures set up in case of an active shooter incident. At my high school, we were taught, if an announcement was made over the PA of a certain fake faculty member was to report to the main office. That was our cue to shelter in place and take shelter in the classrooms. Once a year we had the drill, and every time it lasted about 5 minutes. We had a teacher though that was just a little bit off. I had him for a class during 8th period of my junior year, and as time went on, the whole class kind of figured he just was a very serious, quirky kind man. On one particular day, about 10 minutes into class, he tells us all to get under our workstations because he heard the coded announcement. We all hid till the end of the period in our positions until the end of class bell rang. Our classroom was at the end of the school, and it was generally a quiet outside, so we never questioned whether this was a drill or not. This happened 2 more times during the year. We eventually just figured that he wanted to test us with his own drills. Looking back on it, and by talking to some of my former classmates, turns out he was faking active shooter drills to get the class to shut the fuck up at the end of long days. He had a jar of punishments for whenever you broke one of the rules. Both the punishments and the rules could be created by the students, and if you broke the rules you had to draw a punishment. Rules included everything from insulting another student, to speaking out of turn, to forgetting a pencil. The punishments all centered on public humiliation. And because it was a class of high schoolers given almost full reign, every class devolved into nothing but trying to bait other students into being punished, or convincing the teacher they needed to be. Punishments included forcing students to get on hands and knees while pushing a penny across the room with their nose and saying beep beep I'm a Jeep. Performing the highly sexual call on me dance, requiring students to scoot up and down every aisle of desks on their butt like a dog while barking the whole time, or making one kid spend an entire class at the front of the room, facing the wall, wearing a literal dunce cap. I forgot a pencil one day and had to stand at the front of the room while every student in the class balled up a piece of paper and threw it at me. One kid threw an entire notebook. I then had to crawl around on the floor and clean up all the trash. The teacher ended up getting reported at the end of the year after I and several other students complained about it unofficially to a different teacher, and while he wasn't fired the jar of punishments was gone the next year. Assaulting me because I didn't kiss her. Kindergarten. Back in probably 1979. We had this mousy sissy spastic looking teacher who had it as policy that every kid who came into class first thing in the morning had to kiss her on the cheek. I don't even remember if I did or didn't do it that morning. I know that another kid and I in that class looked very similar. It could have been him that didn't kiss her, or it could have been me because I don't really remember. Anyways, I was sitting in class with my back to the teacher. We had large round tables with maybe 4 kids per table when class started, and she called me out publicly in front of the class that I hadn't kissed her. I was an extremely shy child and this was the worst thing that could have happened. The whole class's attention focused on me. I basically froze and ignored her order for me to come up to her and kiss her in front of the class. I had my legs/feet wrapped around the legs of the chair I was sitting in. She got mad, stormed over to me and tried to yank me out of the chair. The chair went with me and then flew from me to loudly clatter across the floor and I freaked out. Bawling, screaming etc. She realized she faked up big time and backed off as I continued to cry. I'm in my 40s now and can still remember it quite vividly. Fuck you, Mrs. Thompson. It wasn't my teacher, but my brother's first grade teacher is honestly one of my most hated people. He's always been a big dude. We both started developing fairly early on, and he's always been a little on the portly side, so he was taller than the other kids and a lot heavier, and at that age he was very friendly and affectionate. He was a big hugger, and would hug anyone and everyone without any thought to it, but wouldn't force it on people. If they wanted a hug, he'd give them a hug. If they didn't, okay, no hugs, and he's cool with that. There was no problem with it in preschool or kindergarten, never had any incidents. But basically the second he got into first grade, his teacher started in on him. I don't know if she was just old-fashioned, if she came from a well-meaning place, or if she just zeroed in on him cause she was a faking beach, but she did not approve of him hugging people. I'll admit, at first it was probably concerning. Here's this big dude, at least half a foot taller than everyone else, holding a smaller kid. Does look a little suspicious. But even after she established that everyone was cool with his hugs, that he wasn't forcing anyone to do anything, and that he was a sweet and understanding kid who just wanted to show people that he cared about them, she would punish him for hugging someone, yelling at him in front of the class, holding him back at lunch and recess, calls home, sending him to the principal. Anything she could think of doing she would do. My mom declared faking war on this woman and did her best to get her fired. I think she ultimately succeeded because my mom raised enough hell with the principal and school board. I don't remember hearing about that teacher being around after that, but unfortunately she couldn't be fired in the middle of the year and my brother couldn't be transferred to another class with a teacher who didn't hate his guts. There were weekly standing meetings with the principal about this teacher's behavior wherein she was told to leave my brother alone, daily phone calls, sometimes multiple, and it hit a point where my mom would go into work late most mornings to walk my brother to class and tell the teacher that if she got a phone call for something as stupid as a 7-year-old hugging his friend, she would not be happy about it. Spoiler alert, she got phone calls anyway. I honestly think that this beaches why my brother hates school and learning just in general. Before that year he was always very eager to learn and a very avid reader. Afterwards, it was like pulling teeth to get him to do anything school related and he started acting out. The biggest incident was when he stole another kid's test and wrote his name on it. My mom had a talk with his 2nd grade teacher and she tried her best with him and honestly went a ridiculous amount out of her way to try and help him, so she knew what was going on, and even after the test stealing incident he didn't get in a lot of trouble, but I don't think that anything she could have done would have fixed it. My brother is also a very shy person and never really shows any kind of affection now. He's gotten a little better in recent years, but he still hates school and is really struggling in college. I honestly don't think that he's ever going to do well in any kind of schooling because his heart is just never gonna be in it, and I place a lot of that blame on this facade of a teacher. I took a trip to this school-sponsored leadership retreat in high school. It was a kind of week-long camp experience where we did all of this team building stuff. I should probably mention that this was a public school. I went with a friend of mine and it was actually a pretty good time. The only kind of odd part was on the last day, a bunch of the other students, as in all of them, gathered around a bonfire and were singing these Christian songs. My friend and I weren't really into that, so we just kind of hung back by ourselves. Later, we were supposed to take an anonymous survey about the experience. Neither of us made a big deal about that part, but we did both mention that it seemed kind of exclusionary, especially considering the whole point of the trip. Despite being anonymous, one of our teachers who was along for the trip recognized our handwriting and decided to ask us about that part of the survey individually. She initially just wanted to know more about why I felt that way, so I told her that I'm not religious and don't believe in God, and it just kind of took me off guard how it seemed to happen all of a sudden. She said something to the effect of, "I'd be interested to talk to you in 10 years and see if you haven't changed your mind." Even at the time it seemed pretty condescending. That's when you talk down to other people, but later on I realized how really not cool that was. Oh, it's been about 17 years since that happened. Still not religious, Mrs. So-and-so. 8th grade. Catholic school. Around the years 2001 to 2002. Mrs. K. Every week we had to memorize the definitions of our science vocabulary words. And then she would give us oral quizzes. She would stand in front of the class on her podium. She'd call a student at random. She'd demand the definition of a word. If you didn't recite it verbatim, she'd humiliate you. Not just reprimand you, sense humiliate you. She had students in tears on multiple occasions because she'd actively try to embarrass them for not taking the time to study. Eventually, the school made her stop. When she'd assign homework, she would assign the girls of the class to do the even-numbered problems, and she'd assign the boys the odd-numbered problems. Why? Because, in her own words, boys are odd. One day in homeroom, we had some extra time after our lesson. She asked the class if anyone could recite the Memora, a Catholic prayer. I should mention at this point that I was the only Protestant in class. I was also one of the best students, and this bothered Mrs. K. We had memorized the Memora months prior for a quiz, but we'd almostly forgotten it by then. I, however, had a superb memory and decided to raise my hand. I was the only student raising my hand. Rather than call on me, she sighed loudly with exasperation and exclaimed, "Could someone who has been taught the Bible please raise their hand?" I was afraid of her. 9th through 11th grades. All boys Catholic school. Around the years 2002 to 2005. Mr. R. Mr. R was ancient. He taught Latin, and we joked that that was his first language. At first he seemed like a great teacher, then we noticed certain odd things. There was one student in our very small Latin class, Jay, who had done some modeling work in the past. He was in the background of a teen neck commercial, apparently. He was objectively very attractive. Every day Mr. Ra would count how many students were in class, in lieu of doing attendance. He'd count in Latin, nus, duo, trs, quattuor, quinque, sech, septem, oct, novem, decim. Guess who was always 6? Latin, sech. That's right, J. Every day, while counting, he'd point at J and say sech. He made numerous comments about Jay's clothing throughout the years. Many of these comments bordered on very inappropriate. One day, he decided to give us an example of how to use a certain grammatical construction in Latin. He wrote on the board, Jay's Latin name, Miles, pulchrum est. Translated, Jay, the soldier, is beautiful. It was still in our first few months of Latin at the time, and we didn't know what pulchrum meant. So, while Mr. R was explaining the appositive to the class, a few of us in the back row looked up that word in the glossary of our textbook. Apparently, Mr. R saw what we were doing and erased pulchrum, replacing it with a more innocent adjective, just as we finished looking up its meaning. But my favorite was a particularly cold, snowy day. I swear to God, this is 100% true. Mr. R came into class with, I kid you not, a small glob of something white on his chin. The 12 or so of us in class were whispering to each other trying to figure out what it was. A few minutes went by, and it hadn't melted, so it obviously wasn't snow. It could been mucus, but it seemed so uniformly white, not green, and was on his chin, not near his nose. Halfway through class, Mr. R nonchalantly grabbed a tissue and pretended to wipe his nose while cleaning up his chin. Of course, being 15 or so year old boys, you can imagine what we thought that glob was. We never found out for sure. He was forced to resign a few years after I graduated. Another teacher that I was friends with told me the details. One student excused himself from Mr. R's class to use the restroom. That student took a particularly long time in the bathroom. When that student returned to class, Mr. R exclaimed, "What took you so long? Were you molested in there?" The school didn't take kindly to his use of the M word. He resigned a few days later. He died a few years later. I had a 5th grade teacher who singled me 411 out. He would request that I stay after school for extra help. Okay. I kind of needed it, since the asshole would send me anywhere but his classroom. I never got into trouble. I didn't really do anything till I got to high school. I may have been an instigator. I once talked a kid into jumping out of a window. The classroom was on the ground. He would tell the class that I was taking too long on a test, or that I was being too fast and showing off, and how most of them were wrong. I was always verbally called out. My homework would disappear, and answers on my tests would either be changed, erased, or marked wrong, even if they were right, so I always was failing. He told my mom I would end up as a teenage mother, and that a single woman had no right to raise a child. Oh yeah, my parents had just divorced that same year. I took the divorce like a champ, because they were not a good match. He took privileges away from me, because he felt like it. Kids stopped picking on me, because he did a pretty good job. Then he had the audacity to ask my mom if he could tutor me from his house. My mom gave him an earful at that point. Like the 2 hours after school wasn't enough. I now think he was grooming me. and it was completely messed up, and that was also the same year a lot of other shit was going down at home, non-divorce related, and the first time I ever considered suicide. Which one? First grade. Even as a young child I recognized my teacher flirting with my dad. Fourth grade. Had a teacher that yelled constantly over every little thing, insulted people left and right, was just a massive cunt. Fifth grade. The problem kid was mouthy and would not shut up. The teacher flips his desk over, slams it onto the floor, and the kid runs out. Seventh grade. Teacher calls this one kid a stupid little cracker. Also the teacher that openly called me lazy in front of my mother when I couldn't cope with the workload of advanced courses. We're talking like 3 total hours of homework a night after my grandfather died the month before, and I was still so stressed emotionally. Ninth grade. The band teacher that everybody knew chose the new student band leader from which of the junior and senior girls would sleep with him. Note that only girls were allowed to go for this position, which as I've come to understand, is quite odd. 10th grade. The teacher that wore low-cut tops every day and had on super short skirts always. 11th grade. The teacher that was so dense and senile that she fogged out and wrote something meant for the overhead projector onto the actual projection screen. Also the teacher that talked routinely and vocally about her recent divorce. 12th grade. The teacher that got caught in an affair with a student later on that had started in my 12th grade art class when this kid was in the 9th grade and 14 years old. My 4th grade teacher turned off the lights and played a Hilary Duff album or movie soundtrack on repeat during reading time. She bragged about having perfect skin and pedicures. To 4th graders, she told us within the first week of getting to know you time that she hated kids and would never have any. She was probably in her early 30s, decently attractive, not as hot as she thought she was, and got fired before half the year was over. Had another teacher, 8th grade, who would give candy to me and his daughter. We were both in his class together during tests/downtime in class. No one else. I wasn't all that close to him, or even to his daughter. He was rumored to have been fired from 3 schools for being inappropriate with girls. I have no idea if this was true. He definitely left 3 schools abruptly during the school year under vague circumstances. My friend's sister was one of the girls who accused him at one of the schools. She also was a hoe and probably wasn't getting great grades. But for that to happen at 3 schools. He was an amazing teacher who never gave me that vibe. He reminded me of Robin Williams. Another teacher, 10th grade, broke a wooden desk by slamming a hardcover textbook down next to a sleeping student's head in effort to scare him awake, not as a risky practical joke, but out of rage. He also kicked his own metal desk and dented it because he was mad at a student for not paying attention/getting an answer wrong. Pretty sure he hurt his own foot too. I heard about an instance where he made a student, my boss's son, wash his hair in the bathrooms because he styled a foxhawk and the dress code didn't allow extreme hairstyles. This was in January though, in a school that was all separate trailers, so the kid had to walk from class to class, outside, with wet hair in the middle of winter. Another teacher 9th grade. You could just tell she was either a late bloomer trying to prove herself as hot to teenage boys, or a stereotypical sorority type who refused to stop trying for the attention of teenage boys. She wore a pound-and-a-half of Macupe, tightly fitting clothes, flirted with boys, kept boys after class just to hang out, picked favorites and didn't even try to hide it, and was just an all-around terribly unqualified teacher. At a private Christian school. She taught Bible. Lol. I have a good one for this kindergarten music class. During Thanksgiving, we would sing holiday themed songs of course. I thought he was weird because he used a microphone. While he sang the song, we would all hide around the room. When the first verse was done, he would creep around the room while singing softly and pounce on a hiding kid scaring them. It was always exciting and fun. When he would find you, he would pretend to eat your arm, make gobble sounds into his microphone and comment on your doneness. I'm not saying my particular level of doneness, but he would always start commenting on the black kids first. Oh no, you're too burnt to eat. He would say sadly or mock angrily. Now that I think about this, I realize you could tell the truly innocent sheltered kids vs the ones who knew saying shit like that wasn't right. The innocent ones would laugh their ass off. They don't get it, of course. They're looking at this kid like he's just being compared to food. But the rest of us kind of just stood there staring at him like, what the fuck? It seemed like he found each kid in order of melanin. Again, not saying where I fit in the spectrum, but he would always end with the white kids, and when he found them, his whole demeanor would change. "Oh, this one is done just right," he would happily exclaim. Then the black kids and Mexican kid would stand there and fall silent as the white kids would crowd around him to be tasted and told they were good. The innocent sheltered kids then kind of changed at the end of the game. The white kids felt happy and the black ones felt sad. What an asshole. When I was a teen, I was telling this story to someone who also had him as a kid. They are 10 years older than me. He did the same shit to them. So 4 years this faking asshole planted that seed in countless little minds. My primary school principal was the biggest dickhead out, and he took a particular disliking to 8-year-old me. If I was to misbehave, he would make me run laps of the oval until I literally vomited or passed out. He did this to other kids too. He would call us awful names. I got beef burger or fatso because I was so skinny, but it got put into my head that I was fat and that's why he would make me run laps. So I later developed a severe eating disorder. This principal wanted to make my life living hell. I was once speaking and I accidentally spat on a girl, so he took it as an excuse to suspend me for 4 days. Also, I was once having an asthma attack in pet and I asked the pet teacher if I could go to the sick bay and he said no. I was coughing and I couldn't breathe, so I took myself up there anyways and ended up having to go in an ambulance to the hospital and staying for a few nights. When I came back to school, the principal pulled me up and started yelling at me for going against what a teacher said and that I shouldn't have taken myself to the office without permission. He subsequently made me run laps, which triggered my asthma again. At the end of grade 4 I finally moved schools because I couldn't take it anymore, and a year later I found out he got fired because he was doing the same thing to a lot of other kids, and he was also caught having sex with the office lady in the school grounds. Guess it's time to tell this one. Typical creepy middle-aged man grooms young girl's story that shows up in these threads, although no satisfying resolution. Sorry. Very small school in a very small town in the middle of the land of butter. I was 12 when I started my adventure with this science teacher, so all of this takes place between 12 to 15. Mr. P was a kind of round dude, mustache, beady eyes that are a little too close together. Middle-aged, married, had 2 or 3 young girls, don't remember exactly. Very punny. His lessons were highly rehearsed blocks of information that were delivered so fast that classmates missed how he littered. Said lessons were the worst kind of wordplay. I loved it. He seemed alright to talk to. We had an interesting banter that was originally written out on tests, as my essay questions would ramble off into nonsense and he'd respond. I still have one where he flattered me at length, telling me he guessed my IQ would be up about 130 and how he wished that in his old age I'd break the social mores and come visit him. Mr.'d bring me into the room on the side where all of the science equipment and specimens were kept, and we'd hover about this fancy desk I never saw him at and talk away from the chatter of the classroom. One time I'd written out my frustrations with my awful home life and classmates bullying me, and he found it and pulled me aside to tell me how he was personally offended, and if I felt like he was doing any of that I could use my words to talk to him directly. It was about this time we communicated frequently, and Mr. P started overtly putting more value into my words than they were worth, policing some of the things I would say, even. One day we were launching rockets and we were outside, and I said an obvious joke that may have poked fun at his racketeering, and he later took me aside after class to tell me it bothered him immensely. Sometime when it got warm enough in Butterland to justify it, he tells me he's got a boat and him and his family are going out on the lake, and he'd love it if I could come with. Not much of a water dweller due to some self-esteem issues with my body. I just sort of nodded, but didn't think too much of it, until he was cold to me the following week and finally told me he was disappointed that I made no effort to show up. I moved away from butter hell during the summer after I turned 15, hopping the butter border into the state of Chicago. During one of my visits to my butter family, this school hadn't let out for whatever break yet, so I stopped by to say hello to the teachers I missed. Ended up in Mr. P's classroom, and he was as frantic as he'd always been, running around doing things, but he refused to even look at me. Didn't say much. My only interpretation nowadays is that he was offended that I moved away from a place that made me want to suicide because he couldn't keep up his charade. Took me a little while after that to realize what happened. I found the above mentioned paper not too long ago and just felt nauseated at how inappropriate it was for a 45-year-old man to have written that to a 13-year-old girl. Still have dreams where I'm back there. Used to be that he was chasing me. Now I'm trying to get answers out of him. It is a temptation to try to get back into contact just to ask questions. He'd like my car. Maybe my spine would scare him away forever. Maybe I can pull a hair out of his faking mustache for every single child he's tried to groom. When I was in middle school we had this weird greasy history/geography teacher who was in his 30s. No one really liked him tbh. One day in 8th grade he gave us a test and a few minutes into it, he calls out this one prom queen type girl out for cheating. Now, unlike the rest of us blobs, she was very beautiful and always styled flawlessly, so the teacher always paid her extra attention. Who I know. The weird thing was that, yeah, she used to cheat often, but this particular test she decided not to, as it was the last test of the year. So there was no way he could have seen her cheat. My friend who was sitting right behind her also said that she had not been acting suspiciously at all. Anyway, he calls her out, and she stands up saying that she didn't have anything on her that could help her cheat. He obviously isn't satisfied with that answer and goes to check. The most awkward 20 minutes of our young lives. We all watched on as he started patting her down from head to toe. Patting isn't even the right word, more like stroking. Then he tried to check her pockets, which meant putting his fat fingers into them, but said pockets were on her breasts. Yay, tight zeros fashion with pockets in weird places. And on her butt. It wasn't until he came to the pockets on the front of her hips that someone dared to call him out. The guy was sent outside after the teacher had finished checking the poor girl's pelvis. The entire time she had been frozen in shock and she started crying only after he was done. I have never seen someone leave the classroom so fast. Needless to say that I finished my test as soon as possible. I didn't really know what sexual assault was back then. I grew up in rural Bosnia. Nobody ever bothered to explain anything to us, but I knew that it was a situation I should get out of. The girl later called her mother, also a teacher, and there was a big uproar in the school, but in the end Greasy Teach wasn't even suspended. He only gave a half-hearted apology. He is now the principal, and I don't really know how to feel about that. There was a blood drive at my high school when I was in the 10th or 11th grade, I think, and you had to sign up for a time slot to donate. I loved giving blood. Granted, getting out of class for a few minutes was nice, but I loved to be able to help people this way, since I had a serious injury as a kid and needed blood before. I picked a time that was available and told the teacher for that period that I'd be out of class for about 20 or so minutes. Class was roughly an hour and 15 minutes long, to donate. She rolled her eyes and I didn't think anything of it at the time. I was a naive student. They make the announcement for the group for my time and I go on to do my part. Go back to class sometime after I was done, had my I gave blood sticker, leftover juice and an extra cookie, signed paper for my teacher proving I was there and gave blood, and finished class. I find out later that that damn witch counted me absent for that class, even though I was there for most of it and had the permission from the school to give blood. Otherwise, why would they have allowed students to participate? I didn't like her anyway. She was very judgmental towards me because I was an odd student. Very unpopular, quiet, but obedient, and for some reason she didn't like that. She once told me I was stupid and an idiot because I didn't want to sign up for a voter's registration card. I told her I wasn't educated enough with politics to be able to make a sound decision in voting for someone. That I didn't, and still don't, understand politics. It's not my area of interest or know-how. She told me to get educated or stay stupid. She was my sociology teacher, as big as a house, and looked like a clown. I had a US history teacher back in 9th/10th grade. I loved that guy. He had a picture up on his wall that was him pointing like Uncle Sam, and it said, "I want you to give me $1." He'd always joke about living in a van down by the river a la Chris Farley. He skateboarded with kids in the parking lot during lunch sometimes. He also kept a trumpet in his class, and if anyone fell asleep in his class he'd sneak up behind them and play the trumpet right behind them and scare the shit out of them. He and I bonded because I was a little punk chick and we talked about music a lot, mostly my favorite band at the time, Dead Kennedys. One day he brought in a really nice glossy photo of Jello Biafra doing spoken word that he said he had taken himself a while back. I thought he just brought it in to show me, but he was giving it to me. Then this really annoying, obnoxious little fuck of a kid who was probably developmentally disabled to a degree, think Chuckle from Shameless, waddled up to his desk and tried to snatch the picture out of my hand, and Mr. R promptly slapped his hand away, hard. I admittedly thought it was awesome at the time. This isn't really inappropriate at all, but another day I brought in a little action figure of Tundler from the Puppet Master movies, and without saying anything, Mr. R snatched him from me while lecturing, and put him in his shirt pocket with his head and arms sticking out. He kept him in there all day. I didn't NGO get it back from him until the day was over. It was also a ongoing thing for him to give me food randomly during class. I was sick/tired a lot, and he got it into his head that I was malnourished. He would be walking around while lecturing and casually place an apple or Nutri-Grain bar on my desk in front of me while doing so. The last thing I can remember is one day I was sitting out in the hallway against the wall during class. I can't remember if I got in trouble or what, but I was just sitting there doing work. I looked down the hall and saw Mr. R standing outside his classroom, just looking at me and smiling. I kinda smiled back and blushed, not really sure if he was really looking at me. He was decently far down the hallway, but there was nothing else going on in the hall whatsoever. I looked back up towards him, and he was still looking in my direction and smiling. All of this stuff was pretty borderline and innocent enough, except for slapping that kid. I'm to this day not convinced he thought of me any other way than his little buddy. Full disclosure, I had a huge crush on him at the time. He was fairly young, really hot, and super cool for a teacher. So I'm pretty sure I 10/10ths would have. Not saying it wouldn't have been beyond faked up, but I would have at the time. Here's one that took me years to realize, maybe until I was an adult. In 6th grade, we took standardized placement tests for junior high. The teacher took me aside and said, "I suspect the boy who sits next to you of cheating. I want you to get every question wrong. I will fix up the test afterward." Well, I suspected nothing, and didn't even realize what a stupid thing the whole idea was, or that on such a test a teacher would not really be able to fix it, or that if she was really worried just seat the kid by himself, or whatever. I stupidly did exactly what she asked. When I got to junior high, I was in a really easy math class, so easy that I went to the teacher and complained after we took similar tests in junior high, and I did pretty well. I never got out of the class. The teacher actually got angry, don't know why, although he gave evidence of being crazy in other incidents, dangerously so. I then went to the counselor and we looked at my test scores, and there was this one placement test with a really low score. He said, "I don't know what happened here." I still did not believe the 6th grade teacher would have lied to me, but I think I told him the story and I'm not sure he believed me. But now as an adult I know, the teacher all that time really didn't like me, and had figured out a way, in her mind, to screw me over. Not sure what she thought the long-term result would be, but I'm convinced she planned the whole thing. This is not a case of her forgetting to fix up the test. She was a strange woman, I think. I was bullied by a lot of teachers. My math teacher, Mrs. White, was the fucking worst. Once, she held up a drawing I had been working hard on during breaks in my classes, and made the whole class make fun of it. She often played Alvin and the Chipmunks during every single test. She openly called me an idiot because I had the worst grade in the class, because she openly said she docked off my grade if I cried in class. Which was often because she was an asshole. I had gotten pretty sick, probably from stress, now that I think back, but also because I used to get strep throat once a year. That kept me out of school for a week. I also think I had gotten a flu-like virus at the same time and was out for 2 weeks. My mom had gotten all of my homework, and I did it the last couple days of my off time when I was feeling better. I turned it all in before class. A week later, my first period teacher hands me the tip letter and asks me if I knew about it when I came to school. I said no, and she escorted me to faking Mrs. White's room where she said that because I had missed so much school she wanted me to do 3 months worth of work again in tip. I did it in one day because the dumbers didn't realize that I kept all of my precious assignment in my backpack because she wasn't the first shitty teacher that forgot to put in a grade. She told Mr. D about how bad of a student I was and that I would cause a scene. Even though he isn't supposed to talk to tip students, he still called me out during his class saying I wasn't working when I was. He took up my assignments to show Mrs. White before I was done, forced me to have lunch halfway late, and forced a student to say that he'd talk to me during lunch when all I said to him was I can't talk, I have detention. She also tried to call my mom when I refused to go to tip the next day on the premise that I was a stupid idiot who couldn't understand the concept of tip anyway and should stay there for the rest of the year. My mom was so livid she came to the school and brought some of her police coworkers with her for good measure. The police officers had a conversation with her and she was never mean to me again. I conveniently got a D on my grade report, so I wasn't held back. My mother also grounded me over my grade, despite the whole ordeal, and I was locked in a bedroom for almost 3 years. But that's another story. I was in middle school, 7th grade. I was in kindergarten, and it was during recess when this happened. At our playground, we had this looping course that was painted specifically for us to ride our school provided tricycles on. After practicing how to write letters for the first 2 hours of class, recess had finally begun. All the kids, including myself, were scrambling to get a bike. After managing to get one, there I was, cruising along the course without a care in the world. Everything is going great for the first few laps or so. Then, this kid named Jess comes racing down my zone while yip-yapping to his friend across the track and ends up rear-ending the back of my tricycle. He ends up doing a half-bar spin from the impact and falls off his bike. Luckily for me, the angle in which he hit me just caused me to jolt forward a bit. At this point, I'm looking back and all I can see is Jess bawling his eyes out. So I get off my bike and run to make sure he's okay. As I was running to Jess, my teacher also noticed that he was on the ground crying and came skipping over. I get there first and I ask, "Jess, are you okay?" Then as my teacher approached us, instead of replying, he just pointed at me. My teacher, Mr. Lee, asked Jess, "Did Michael, me, do this to you?" As Jess was crying his eyes out, he just sat there while saying absolutely nothing and nodded his head up and down. At this point, I'm trying to convince Mr. Lee that I didn't do anything to purposely harm him. If anything, he did it to himself, but this guy didn't give a shit. He proceeded to take me inside the classroom early for what I thought would be a timeout. So, he takes me into a cubicle area so that we were both out of plain sight. Then, he tells me to bend over so that my belly rests on his lap, pulls my pants halfway down, just so that Summers was exposed, and then, he spanked the living crap out of me. He probably hit that at least 8 times, while simultaneously shouting Chinese terms after each strike. I was pretty much Jess after he was done, pouring my eyes out. Except, I had no idea what I did wrong. To this day, I still don't know. I didn't tell my dad about it because he's hit me much harder than Mr. Lee ever could. I figured what he did was normal at school. Little did I know back then. In front of the whole of my school year, approximate 300 people, art teacher. Here is a list of the pupils who I will not be taking on the trip to the art gallery because I don't think they have the maturity. Edgar Atheling. That is all. What a beach. A few years later we had a photography exam. The best students got to use the dark room for the first 2 days. Fresh chemicals, all new supplies. The students who they suspected might not get the best grades use the dark room for days 3 and 4. Second-hand chemicals, whatever supplies were not used in the first 2 days. And the third group was just me and my buddy Mike, who had to get everything done before 3 PM that day because the darkroom was being cleaned before the weekend. I can laugh about it now, because I can see this woman was just a beach picking fights with a teenage boy. You won't be surprised to find out that I didn't grow up to be a photographer, but I go to art galleries all the time. Edit. I remember another time my girlfriend did her final project on a huge canvas. She was a great artist and had painted me and her on the beach that she copied from a photograph my mum took. Art teacher, this is great, good work. But why did you have to paint that weird boy? I was stood right next to her. May not be as serious as some, but definitely made my already terrible school life worse. In pre-K, I got in big trouble because a boy asked me if I wanted to have sex, and not knowing what that meant I said yes. He touched my vagina, and when the teacher saw, I got yelled at about how I should never let a boy touch me down there, and had to sit out while the others played, including this little boy who was told nothing and not disciplined for it. In kindergarten I was told by the teacher's aide that my father was coming up to the school to beat me because I wouldn't eat raisins. A lie. In 2nd grade, the teacher had this bathroom rule where, after you went to the bathroom, you choose who goes next. I was bullied and had no friends, and the popular girls would choose each other first. I really had to pee and begged the girl to pick me. She scoffed at me. So I begged the teacher, and she said I couldn't go unless I was chosen. I peed on myself at my desk while everyone laughed. In 7th grade I had a teacher who disliked me, even though I was respectful and never got into any trouble. I had stick straight hair at the time that I would wear down. She said in front of the class that she hates my hair and I always look raggedy, and asked if my mother ever brushed it. Then said she is going to buy a brush and brush my hair herself in front of the class so they can see how much I don't take care of myself. Doesn't seem so bad, but when everyone already makes fun of you, it can be terrible. Gonna get lost, but oh well. When I was in grade 4 I had a classroom and a portable. This teacher knew me because my brother, who is a year older, had already taken his grade 4 with him. Turns out he didn't like my bro, so now he doesn't like me. One time I was handing in my assignment and just happened to still be carrying my pencil. He stops and asks, "What are you doing with that? Are you going to stab me?" I was just all what? Not even realizing what he meant. Another time he came to notice that I was a doodler and kept a lot of pens, markers, etc. in my desk. So he told the girl whose desk was across from mine to slam her desk into mine so all my stuff spilled out if she ever saw me doodling. So she did, and I was obviously upset and looked to the teacher, wondering what the fuck just happened. He just stared at me without a word and continued the class. Another time he was talking to the class about how convenient the portable was because he could just stomp on the floor and the shaking would move the computer mouses in the corner of the classroom and turn them on. So he demonstrated this, but only 2/3 flicker on. So then I stomped, and the third one turned on. I remember looking back at him all happy like, "Hey, look what I did. Did I help?" And he just said, "Why would you do that?" with a look of disgust. Seriously. Final thing. I had a while where I would draw on my white eraser in pen and press it to my skin to make a tattoo. It was kind of fun, and I even did it for friends during recess. But once during class I again went to turn in an assignment and he noticed the tattoos and said, "I hope you get ink poisoning from those." I was pretty airheaded as a kid, so I could understand getting upset with my sheet, but I always thought that what he did was too much, though for some reason I never told anyone. Perhaps my attention never staying in the same place just made me not care so much at the time. This story takes a little background. We had a policy in 5th grade that if you missed 3 homework assignments, you missed the next field trip. This happened to me before a trip to a local Civil War site, and it so happens my family were massive Civil War buffs. So when I had to miss the trip, I just doubled down on the fact that we didn't have a trip because I hadn't been given a note or slip informing my parents of what happened. Keep that in mind for later. So eventually, as kids always do, I get found out, massively chewed out, grounded, in all sorts of trouble with my parents and the school, etc, etc. Teacher treats me pretty poorly for the rest of the year, and I assume it's because I lied a bunch to everyone about the whole thing until I got caught. Fast forward 18 years or so, At a family dinner, my old man was relating the story of the whole thing. A tradition of sorts in our family is laughing about old family fuck-ups, and added on a part that I never knew and had never even really considered. The fact that he called her out on the fact that she didn't give me a note or send an email or even give a phone call about the whole thing. In her words, I trusted young you/soul revertant to do the right thing. To which my father brilliantly replied to the effect of he's a 10-year-old who's about to get in massive trouble and is in a situation where you're expecting him to do it with no evidence or oversight. What did you think was going to happen? And proceeded to chew her out over the phone, which explained the poor treatment. The pretty screwed up part, at least for me, was the thought that she had no communication about this to my parents. A fairly major punishment caused by a fairly repeated offense, and she didn't so much as give them a phone call, or even make me sign a note or something. That level of disconnect, and just frank laziness on her part is pretty stunning, and I can only wonder what else had gone on over the years that she trusted her students to do the right thing about, and how often it blew up on her, or the students or even the parents, because of the lack of communication. Small potatoes compared to some of the other stories here, but it stuck with me. When I was in primary school, in year 2/3, don't remember which one, I asked the teacher if I could go to my bag to get something, drink bottle. Teacher said yes, but be quick. It was a hot day. Walked back inside, and I stopped dead in my tracks. Teacher was glaring at me like I had broken a rule, and gave me detention for somehow breaking a rule. Oddly enough, someone else went to their bag afterwards, maybe 20-30 minutes, and brought their drink bottle in, but didn't get into trouble. In year 2/3, don't remember which one, it was nearing lunchtime. I was excited to buy my lunch. My dad worked in the canteen. When the siren went for lunch to start, the teacher said that everyone was free to go, then said that I wasn't allowed to go, told me sit down, shut up, and finish the work that we were going to work on after lunch. Everyone and the teacher left the room, just me alone in there. I'm not sure what I did to deserve that, but one of the other teachers saw me in the room, alone, and told me to go outside, neither of us knowing that lunch was almost over. So I went straight to the canteen, got halfway there, then the siren went, so lunch was over, continued onwards to the canteen. And one of the other teachers told me to go to class, and lunch was over. Went back to class, got yelled at by the teacher for being late, and got detention. Somehow, the rules beat a child's health. This happened on multiple occasions, as well. I got threatened and humiliated by the principal of the school. My dad went to the principal and told him to do something about bullying. I was bullied, make it stop, and do something about it. Principal said that something was being done. Then said to my dad that if he ever went back to him about the bullying, me and my sister would be expelled and we'd be banned on premises. He also said that if dad got the police involved, the principal said that he would make sure all other primary schools in the area would not allow me and my sister to be enrolled. For the humiliation, the principal called all the year 3s for an assembly. Was in year 3, told me to stand up in front of everyone, and started talking how bullying wasn't on. It's bad, don't do it. I thought he was done talking, so I started to sit down. He asked what I was doing, and then continued to say that I wasn't allowed to sit down yet, contradicting everything he just said. Looked away for a few minutes, looked back, realized I was still standing, and told me to sit down. I got detention for that. I don't remember when this happened. It was at the same school, as well. I was crying in class, don't remember what about, and the teacher told me to stop being a baby, to shut up, do work, stop being a distraction, stop crying, and told everyone else in class to leave me alone. Continued crying, as what the teacher said made it worse, told me to go outside. Teacher came out a few minutes later, after I had calmed down a bit, and told me to finish the work, and that I had detention for crying. Side note, these events happened at the same school, with different teachers, over the course of 4 years, years 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not sure if these count as faked up, but from my perspective, I see it as faked up. Also, I did nothing wrong, and the teachers didn't get into trouble for it. In elementary school my friends and I were kind of the cool clique. I was kind of the nerdiest one until about junior high, at least in terms of fashion and haircut. I still was and kind of a nerd. We were friends with the assistant pet teacher Mr. R, who was super cool in our eyes. Young, Pirsty 8R's cool younger teacher. It wasn't until my friend and I were looking back on it a couple years ago that we realized some off stuff. We are 28 now. He'd have us sit on his lap and just seemed weirdly interested in us or stuff we had to say compared to other kids. He'd let us swear and would swear when it was just us around. He also brought weapons to the school that he would show us in secret, sometimes like a butterfly knife and brass knuckles. He also gave us fireworks a couple of times and made us promise not to say we got them from him. Being the nerdiest of the bunch, I always felt a little bad when he seemed to give some of my rowdier friends more attention because he must have thought they were cooler. He'd also ask us for hugs that, looking back on it, seemed to last kind of long, or he'd put his arm around us when he talked to us. I think he may have been trying to groom us for molestation, but besides my best friend I don't have any contact with the rest of them, so I don't know if anything ever really happened. But I remember the two most problem kids, one who was adopted and an absolute terror for his parents, like this kid was Bart Simpson's status problem child, and another who left town suddenly and then all of our houses got calls from the FBI because they were investigating his parents for massive theft and fraud, had gone to his house a couple of times and hung out there with him alone. This story doesn't involve me but my uncle. When I was approximately 15 years old, I was finally able to sit at the grown-up table with all the adults on Christmas. Everybody was going around telling stories about how school used to be back in the day. Every story was pretty normal until it was my uncle's turn. He first asked if we had swimming in school, which we did in pet. He then asked what we would wear in the pool. Swimming trunks like usual. He gets sort of quiet and then goes, well, my teacher would make us get in our underwear and line up to take attendance. All guy school, remember, so it really wasn't that embarrassing. No girls to worry about looking at you. We all started laughing and thought it was bizarre that he stood there in his underwear as his teacher just watched. His face got beet red and started telling the rest of the story. If you guys think that's weird, get this. I joined the swimming team because I liked the pool so much. Every practice my couch, pet teacher, would make all of us jump in the pool naked and practice our technique. At that point the whole table went from laughing to seriously freaked out for my uncle. I'm now 28 years old and have not spoken to him in years. My parents said after that Christmas he has never been the same. All those years he just thought it was as normal. The backstory for this one is that I don't like being hugged or touched in any way. It makes me feel uncomfortable and I avoid it if I can. I was also completely flat-chested until I was 15, then it all went a bit haywire, and by 16 I was most assuredly not flat-chested. Anyway, on with the story. There was this one teacher who would focus more on girls in his lessons. He'd also touch girls' shoulders. We all thought it was so he could check if we were wearing a bra. Anytime I needed help in a lesson pre-15, he would basically ignore me. Then after the growth spurt I got much help and shoulder touchings, which I'd always flinch away from, and he'd make a thing out of it. When I was 17 I went on a month-long field trip and he was the teacher in charge. At one point on the holiday I was feeling ill, and when he went to give me a hug I said that I really don't like being hugged, and could he not? So his response was, what's going to happen when you're married? And then try and hug me every chance he got. Another girl was having boyfriend issues and he'd seek her out to talk about it privately, to which she would say no. He was actually a good teacher and it was a small school, so we'd all make a bit of a joke about it, but now it's just a bit like, no. Anyway, he's left that school and now works at an all-girls school, which is concerning. In second grade I was a pretty good student. I loved reading and I was really good at spelling. We had these workbooks where the teacher would give us words out loud and then we'd form a line to have them graded at her desk. Once you spelled all the words correctly, she'd give you more words. I was on probably my 6th list or something, and while I was loving it, she seemed to be getting increasingly more annoyed with me for reasons my second grader brain couldn't comprehend. The last list included the word took, which was simpler than all the other words, but I couldn't remember it. I spelled it talk and went back to her desk and dropped off my list. I got back to my seat on the other side of the classroom and she yelled across the class for me to stand up. I remember this weird ass smile she had when she started talking because I didn't understand what she was suddenly so happy about. She said, "Raptora, how do you spell took?" I said, "Tok." "No, are you serious? Class, everyone tell Raptora how to spell took." And she made me stand there while everyone spelled for me, and then she made me repeat it while she laughed. Although her laughing might be just in my mind. Regardless, that was the first time I learned what true embarrassment feels like, and I learned not to stick out. Also that not all grown-ups are nice. Fuck you, Mrs. Schofield. Sorry, this is going to be long but certain background needs to be explained. I went to a combined primary/high co-ed Catholic school from years 3 until high school graduation. I was at a public school before this. My brother and I were part of their what I like to call charity quota. Basically Catholic schools in Australia, unsure of elsewhere, take a certain number of children that otherwise would not be able to afford the fees. I'm not sure if the children have to be baptized into the Catholic Church or not. My brother is, but I'm not, so either it doesn't matter, or I got in through apparent virtue of having a Catholic brother. Anyway, I'm saying this because it meant my brother and I were two kids being raised by a single mother below the poverty line, surrounded by kids of middle class families who had opportunities and privileges that I could only have dreamed about as a child. I never felt like I belonged as a result, and still resent the fact I was forced by my parents to attend. By year 8 I was at the end of my tether. The kids were bullying me, my previously absent father was causing me more emotional turmoil than ever before. I ended up depressed and slightly off the rails. I'd had depressive issues before but not this bad. I enlisted the help of a school counselor who I trusted, would later find out was a big mistake, but not related to this story. Eventually, despite having no training, no psychology degree or even counseling certificate, from what I recall her telling me, she told me I had depression and anxiety. My mother had no idea of half the crap I was feeling. The school counselor called my mother in for a meeting and proceeded to talk to her about me. 2 friends and I were waiting outside and couldn't hear, but could see them. In a little while she called us in, and I went and sat near my mother. She then proceeded to inform me that I was a square peg in a round hole and would never fit in because I just wasn't one of them. She basically told a depressed 13-year-old who had spent the bulk of her childhood feeling like she wasn't worthy and didn't belong in the environment that she spent most of her time in, that she would never belong. I didn't realize how insensitive, tactless and kind of cruel that was until I got older. My mother was furious from the get-go. I just didn't understand why until I got older. To be fair, though, this was the same counselor that also informed one of my friend's mothers that my friend had Princess Beach face syndrome. This is probably moderate when it comes to faked up things my school pulled, but this was one of the only ones I didn't realize was faked up until I got older. In 2nd grade I had a teacher that, on the surface, seemed like a sweet old lady. She looked and sounded, outside of her classroom, like someone's dear old gran. At first I was quite grateful to have been placed in her class, because she seemed the sweetest 2nd grade teacher by far. The complete contrast of what she was actually like as a teacher is difficult to explain. When I think back, my mind clearly distorts my memory of her face, because now I see something out of a horror film. She turned out to be a sadistic, abusive old beach. When I look back at the situation, she clearly had a serious problem, but at that point, as a 2nd grader, it shaped in my mind a perception of what a teacher can be and do. It clearly faked me up, because I got chronic stomachache from fear. What could possibly have been so bad? While yanking students' heads back by their hair, while they scream from the pain, or hitting their heads on their desks, and pressing on it with all she can muster, and screaming at them deranged, are some of the images that are clearly burned into my memory. On top of that, she had this faked up system of having the dumb kids sit in front and the smart kids sit at the back. Guess where I sat? 2nd grader me had no idea how sick she really was. I didn't really think I could protest. And this really shows what kind of school system we had, and may also point to the bigger picture of our societal system at that point. I'm from South Africa and that was still 2 years before the end of apartheid. So, I had this bad stomachache that persisted for a few months. Paranoid, naive, 7-year-old me thought it was an ant that I swallowed when I drank some juice. My mother took me to a doctor, who did an ultrasound, and found nothing wrong. Next I was taken to an educational and child psychologist, because my mother realized it was probably psychosomatic. Needless to say it all came out. The psychologist and my mother went to the school. I think the most faked up thing was that the teacher was still allowed to teach. I was still in her class. Her abusive nature may have subsided and she, probably thinking she should show some change of attitude, placed me at the back of the class. But this didn't really change the fact that she had that faked up system, that she still clearly had a lot of rage, and should not be allowed to educate children. At least the stomachache went away. I'm way late on this, but my chemistry teacher in 10th grade, boy, was he the worst. I don't know how this man got a job. He was a total stoner, it was just obvious, and he was rude. He would show us a really weird illogical way to balance equations, or do something with mole, I don't know. I basically failed that class. But there were clearly easier, more logical ways to get to the correct answer. Most kids did it the logical way, but he would give you 0 points if you didn't do it his way. Literally everyone went to guidance and complained about him. I was in a regular class, and almost all of the guys in the class were stoners, at least. The other chemical teacher gave his class the chemical equation for chocolate, so I asked if we could do that. He gave us the equation for meth. The guys wrote it down. There was this girl in his class who would always come in during transition, a time where the upperclassmen ate lunch, but we had to stay in a classroom or go to other teachers or whatever. Kinda like a study hall period. But she would always go in there for extra help. She didn't get it, and he yelled at her in front of his transition class that she clearly had other issues she needed to resolve. She went straight to guidance. He didn't come back the next year and he knew he wasn't. I didn't have my $80 chemical book to give back at the end of the year, couldn't find it. I was also switching schools the next year, so I went up to him and said, "You're not gonna be here next year. I'm not gonna be here next year. Why don't you just check my name off and we forget about this?" Huh. He did still don't know where my chemical book is. He ended up following us all on Instagram. He still likes my pictures from time to time. Edit, added information. I know I arrive late to this, but also as many others here my memories from a Catholic school are pretty messed up, but here is my top 3. The time the principal in my elementary school installed surveillance cameras on the bathrooms, only on the boys' bathrooms. His reasoning was that all the men on that school were criminals, so we deserved to be treated as criminals, with constant non-stop vigilance. The parents of the school couldn't argue too much with that, and even with some protest that thing went on a couple of years, until we had another principal. The thing that creeped me out is that all our principals were removed periodically, to avoid the trials for harassment and sexual abuse on minors, so those videos of the boys' bathroom were used as evidence in one trial, and got lost, after he evaded the trial in another country. In high school we got a calculus teacher who will blatantly watch and touch all the girls in the classroom. We had desks for 2 people, so he demanded that all the girls left a seat at their side so he could sit down and explain the subjects to them, cuddle them, hug them and just stare at their breasts freely. The guys were obliged to fit in the rest of the classroom in any possible way. And then, here is the MO's faked up part. Whenever he put on some exercises on the blackboard, he made the girls solve it, obviously, but he make them write in the upper part of the board if they had big bosoms, so they had to clean up the chalk afterwards, or he made them write in the lowest part of the board smiling, while he said nope, nope, bending the knees is cheating, darling. If you ask why nobody said anything, it was because that was one of the most difficult subjects on the school and all the girls who went on with his game passed it with 8, at least. In my school, if you flunked a subject you were out. I feel terrible about this, but on that time we even joked about it, that girls had it easy. Man, some of them even went extra miles using more cleavage or thongs for his class in order to attain higher grades. The way we treated one physics teacher, that man got self-esteem problems when he arrived at our school, and high schoolers smell that. People mocked him like everyone else, but then things started to get more violent. We waited for him to get out of the school, to chase him throwing coins at him, until he arrived to the subway, like 4 or 5 blocks. Others used permanent markers to scribble on his suit or shirt. The melting point was one day when he turned into the blackboard to write. Usually he got a rain of blowguns paper spited on him, but that day someone stood up and threw him an egg. He did not have the chance to see who was on nothing. He just stood the red of anger and demanded to be cleansed. Another dude stand up, took the mop. There was one for each classroom, and moped his face. There it was. The teacher just stood there in the middle of 50 hysterical laughters hitting rock bottom. To this day I have never seen human cruelness so clearly as that day. Oh my god. In the 3rd grade we had this teacher. Let's call him Mr. H. Mr. H had a temper on him, and he'd get mad at the students and isolate them from the rest of the class. That is, move their desk to the corner of the room, etc. At one point, half of the class was moved off to various corners of the classroom. Anyway, a few years ago, I'm 23 now, one of my old classmates found our class photo. 2003, 3rd grade. He posted it to Facebook and tagged us all in it, and we began to comment and reminisce. We soon realized Mr. H was pretty much abusing this kid, Rick. Rick was one of the kids always put off to the corner. Now tbh, Rick was annoying, but he wasn't really that terrible. He'd talk, or giggle, or make beats with his pencil. He was never like trying to fight or be aggressive. He was just obnoxious. At one point, Mr. H put him in the corner of the room, with the big TV stand on one side of him, and a wall on the other 2 sides of him. Then he cut this big cardboard thing up, to make it look like jail bars, and put Rick behind it. He could easily have just moved or pushed the bars away. It's not like he was trapped. I think it was more as a metaphor. So as we're talking about how Mr. H treated Rick, we also got onto the subject about how Mr. H would reward us when we did good on our tests by allowing us to massage his shoulders. So now we're all adults, and we are looking back at it like holy fuck, Mr. H abused Rick and has us rub his shoulders as a reward. And none of us thought anything wrong of it until now. As far as I know, Mr. H never got in trouble for molesting anyone or anything like that. And he was actually a pretty good teacher and would bring in those rap multiplication videos and stuff for us. He was nice to those who followed the rules, but those that broke them just got put in classroom jail. A teacher I had in primary school has since been arrested and put away. He was the music teacher, and I also had him after school for violin lessons. It always seemed that only the girls had to sit on his lap for violin lessons, yet the boys never happened to need this one-on-one, close-up help. I remember his breath always smelled like that old man smell of applesauce. In music class you always tried to open your mouth extra wide while singing, as you were awarded for extra effort singing, and your prize was often you got to go to recess/lunch first before everyone else, and get your lunch order, or choose one of the cool fruits lollies from the jar. I always loved the orange ones. We played games like the boa constrictor game in music class, where all the kids liked up and made a tube. The snake's body by stand opposite one another and joining hands with the person opposite, like a receiving line at a wedding, and you and one other person were eaten and gobbled up by the snake, so you had to crawl through the bodies of all the other kids, then join in at the end of the snake. But as the body got longer, you had to be closer to the ground, so at the end of the snake you pretty much had to lie down and crawl through to the end and join the snake. Another game we played was roly-polies, where we all lied down on the floor, body straight and stiff, and rolled around. And when the music stopped you had to roll over the person nearest to you, without using your hands or anything. If you were rolled on, you were out. So you always tried super hard to roll on top of everyone else. I remember this from year 3 or 4 in primary school. I had him for private violin classes. I remember sitting on his lap and his breath. But luckily that's as far as it went for me. Apparently he was found with a bunch of illicit materials and others weren't so lucky. In elementary/middle school, the punishment for incomplete/unfinished homework was a letter home, which had to be signed by a parent, and if you reached 3, it was detention for 3 months, 1 hour after school. The younger kids, 1st and 2nd grade, if you didn't finish your schoolwork during the day and you weren't picked up at the end of the day by a parent, you'd stay for an hour of extra studies or basically detention, until you finished your homework. If your parents picked you up, this didn't apply, and you'd be free to do the work tomorrow, or some other day. I always got screwed and ended up doing this, because I didn't understand a lot of what I was being given. I spent years thinking I was stupid, because I couldn't keep up with the other students, and had to stay after school. I always ended up in detention, from 3rd to 5th grade, until my parents divorced, and my mom would pick me up, and take me home. I was terrible at studying and no one was ever interested in helping me with it. They only gave a damn about putting me in detention after school. Once I started getting picked up and being given time at home to work on things instead of punished at school, I completed my homework just fine. I was an A student from 7th grade through most of high school. In high school, which was attached to a pre-K to 8 school, these were both private schools, there was a uniform which was supposed to be followed. Special pants/polos with logos, had to have certain shoes, a certain kind of belt, etc. One teacher, who self-proclaimed herself a Nazi, not kidding, would line everyone up and inspect branding on pants/belts/shoes/socks/etc. to ensure they were meeting the dress code. These were kids in 6th to 8th grade. When she tried to pull that sheet with the high school students, she was reported, and it stopped with us. Thank God. I imagine someone saved the school a lawsuit if she'd have tried to check someone's pants. She continued to work at the school for a few more years, including being the high school history teacher. She was notorious for having a hard class, by which I mean she failed students for stupid shit. I was thrown out of class for watching a Holocaust video and saying this is crazy, I can't believe this is real. In shock and disgust at watching dead bodies being dumped in a mass grave. She accused me of being a Holocaust denier at 14, because she was batshit crazy, I assume. Later on, she accused me of plagiarizing a paper, because I used a big word. She called me to the front of the class, and demanded I define whatever the word was. When I did, she pointed it out in my paper, and asked me if it was my paper, or if I stole said paper from the internet or someone else had written it for me. I said no. She dismissed me and said she'd be talking to the principal about it. I never heard about it again. I told my mother about it so in case some crazy shit happened, she'd be aware, but nothing ever came of it. Her crazy husband was the one who got me put into detention for skipping class because I couldn't be at school earlier than 8 AM and I was missing homeroom, and that's a class at 7:30 AM. I was 14, with no license and no car, and my mom worked overnight shifts. I got put in detention twice before my mom could get in to see the principal and put a stop to that bullshit. I tell you, some people are just faking crazy. I just can't believe how many people who hate kids work in jobs with kids. My 7th grade history teacher was the beloved teacher of the school. He was also a complete faking douchebag if you weren't one of the popular kids. He had a game show format in his classes where after every activity we did, one person's name was drawn out of a jar to be eliminated like the TV show Survivor, and whoever's name was left at the end of the year got a big prize. We were learning about assembly lines and how working conditions were bad. So he arranged all the desks in a circle, printed out a picture of a car, and we all had to draw in a part of the car on a piece of paper and pass it down to the next person. Then he got out a yardstick and started smacking it against kids' desks yelling work. Then he started making fun of the kids who weren't drawing well or going too slowly. Then he started randomly firing students, making them sit in the middle of the circle. He fired a popular kid, but the kid made a joke, so the teacher forgave him, and he didn't have to sit in the middle. Only unpopular kids ended up in the middle, including me. He apparently only did this with a couple classes before he realized that making kids cry isn't a good thing. We also had a communism activity where each person was given a piece of paper and it was either blank or had a red dot, but we weren't allowed to show the piece of paper to people. The task was to form groups as large as possible without any red dots. The group leader who had the biggest group got immunity from elimination. He decided to join in on the task and joined the group I was forming. He told me that he really wanted me to win the big prize, since he knew I was a good studious student, and the other kids who were still in the running didn't really deserve the prize. I thought he finally was warming up to me, even though I wasn't popular. At the end of the activity, I had the biggest group, and the teacher was holding the piece of paper with the red dot. I got eliminated when he drew my name out. Fuck you, Mr. Dodson, and fuck all of your toadies. You completely ruined the most interesting year of world history for me. In high school, my art teacher obviously lost whatever passion she had for teaching. She would hardly teach us anything, and mostly informed us of competitions, and rode the coattails of the few talented students. She would also tease some of the more behind students. You know, the ones who are taking an art class for an easy credit in a lot of cases. Anyway, there was one kid who was a bit of a disruption. Charismatic, but had a hard time focusing, and distracted others from time to time. He wasn't a particularly good artist, but he had such a great imagination. I felt he could be great if he just started trying. Some of us in the class began encouraging him when he expressed he wanted to be a better artist, but he didn't know how to go about it. We told him he just needed to put time in and focus, and he would be awesome. He got all excited about the next project. He would talk about his work of art every day in class, about how he felt he was getting better and how he was proud of this picture, and we'd all be nothing but encouraging. The teacher had no idea he was really trying. Remember, she had no interest in being involved. Well, when it came time to turn in the assignment, he handed it over to her all proud. She looked it over and started laughing. Like, it was the funniest thing she had ever seen. She then proceeded to hold it up and show it to the class and said, "Here's another one of his masterpieces." He was trying to play it off like it was a joke all along, but I can still feel the hurt I saw in his face to this day, 15 years later. I had several shitty teachers over the years, but two really stick out. My 10th grade English teacher was, looking back, batshit crazy. This man had comic books plastered all over the walls and action figures all over his desk. One day we were reading an extremely depressing book. He only picked texts that had detailed descriptions of death that dealt with suicide. We finish the book and he just smiles and starts giving a detailed lecture on how to go about committing suicide. If any of y'all ever wanna die, I suggest you'll fire up the BBQ with some charcoal. Get it nice and hot, and then swallow it. Your throat will melt shut, so you'll die pretty quick, and won't leave behind a mess. He then proceeded to go into a rage, and knocked everyone's stuff off their desk, and dumped girls' purses onto the floor just because. We also found out through another teacher that he only did us laundry once every 6 months. My second worst teacher was during university. I was taking a course on Roman Catholicism thinking that it would be interesting. The woman teaching that class was an asshole. If you answered any of her questions, her reply would be, "Where did you get your PhD in Catholic studies? You do not have a PhD, thus your answer is invalid, and therefore not holy, because it is not Catholic, thus it is not correct." The university fired her before the course was over, which she found out through the janitor. The janitor walked in and told her, "What are you still doing here? I thought they'd unfired your ass." She responded by asking why they'd fire her. The janitor just looked at her and said, "Probably because you're an ugly as cunt and a beach that needs to go play in traffic," and walked out the door, leaving the professor just standing there in shock. Well, I realized it was faked up, but perhaps you'd like to hear my faked up teacher story anyway. When I was in kindergarten, I had a teacher with a glass eye named Mrs. Oshevsky. Kids used to whisper about her being a mean old witch all of the time, and there was a rumor that used to go around that she had thrown her bell at a kid once. She had one of those big brass bells with a wooden handle that she would ring when she wanted us to be quiet. I was a quiet and shy kid, though. I never had any problems with her, and I suspected that the rumors were all made up and cruel because she had the glass eye and was different. So, one day we are sitting in class and the fire alarm goes off. We'd just gone over the fire drill procedure, so it should have been obvious, but when you're little, well anyway. So the drill was clear. We were to line up single file and exit the room in an orderly fashion without stopping to get anything. Well, the line was moving slow and it just happened to pass right by my cubby with my book bag on it, which I loved, so I didn't see the arm in plucking it off the hook as I walked by and slinging it onto my back. Well, I get to the door and Mrs. Oshevsky stops me and tells me I wasn't supposed to have gotten it and I can't take it with me, that I have to go put it back. I somehow hadn't expected to get called out and I just kind of froze up, so she announces loudly to the class that nobody can get out of the burning building because about _unbecoming can't follow instructions. Then she ripped the backpack off my back and hurled it across the classroom and pushed me out the door. Later she made me go and get it and hang it back up after we'd done head counts and were cleared to go back inside. TLDR, my kindergarten teacher hated children. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of the brown bomber. It was late on a typical Tuesday afternoon in 9th grade. We were in history class at the beginning of 5th period when a guy, we'll call him Steve, raised his hand. Steve asked if he could use the restroom, but the teacher refused, saying, "If it is that important, you should have gone before my class." Of course, we only have about 4 minutes between periods to go to our lockers, switch books, and get to our next class. Steve then lowered his hand and began to squirm in his chair. 8 or so minutes go by when he raised his hand again, pleading, "Please, this is an emergency." The teacher again refused. After a few more moments, Steve then stood up, proclaimed, "I am going to sheet," and ran out of the class. The teacher yelled after him, but Steve was gone. The class laughed, and we were all thinking, "Hell yeah, Steve." Unfortunately, we didn't know what terrible things had occurred right outside the class. After class, we all left in quicker than normal pace to see how Steve was, because he never returned to class. We followed his girlfriend, whom he had been with for years, out of the class to see how he was doing. What we saw next would remain in our memory forever. A long terrible trail of sheety, literally, footprints were seen directly out of the class, through the halls, to a lone, single men's restroom. Steve had already finished his business and gone home by the time we had left class. I can't imagine the embarrassment. Yet, it would not end here. Steve didn't return to class for the entire rest of the week. Many rumors had spread, including things such as I heard he sheets so hard his colon fell out, and I heard he moved to be with other family in another state. The following Monday morning came, and in the hallway stood this infamous boy. We all wanted to approach him and hear the story, but before we could, we heard the scream of his current girlfriend, saying, "Watch out everyone. It's the brown bomber." Steve, extremely upset, again left the school and didn't return for a whole additional week. He shortly after broke up with his girlfriend and returned to normal life. Later that year he owned the title he was given and has played if off like a champ. Rumor has it, you can still smell the brown bomber's tracks throughout the halls. TLDR, a teacher didn't let a student go to the bathroom after repetitive pleads, ending in the student running out of the class and leaving a long trail of sheet to the bathroom. Teachers, please let your students go to the bathroom during class. I've got a couple from the fine sheet, show that is the Georgia education system, but I'll pick the worst two I can remember. When I was in 6th grade I had a special education math teacher. I've got a few learning disabilities, who would regularly berate the class and call us stupid for not understanding things fast enough. She'd make kids anywhere on the spectrum of those like me, that were mostly in the class for the slower paced learning environment, to even the heavily disabled children who had modified curriculums cry. It got so bad that my mom had me transferred out of the class because she'd rather have me fail a math class than constantly come home bullied by a teacher. Like, as a kid it was upsetting, but I didn't actually think about how faked up it was for a special education teacher to be calling kids stupid till a few years later. Moving on to high school and a continuation of the clusterfuck of a special education handling in Georgia schools. I basically have a disorder where it's incredibly hard for me to write paper pencil for long periods of time without my handwriting basically devolving to the point that it's completely illegible. Because of that, I used a laptop in school up until one teacher had a faking hissy fit about it. Basically, this woman, a bastion of the faking Stone Age, had a personal vendetta against laptops in classes. She believed that I was being given an unfair advantage over the other students and thus never actually let me use it in class. Lo and behold, despite the fact that I never got lower than an 80 on a test, I ended up failing the class because I was constantly turning in my class walk late, or she wouldn't accept it for being too messy and told me I didn't try hard enough. Then she wouldn't accept half my homework because, not being in class, I would type it, and she only accepted typed assignments when it was explicitly asked for. Needless to say, when my mom finally found out the reason, I hadn't told her because I was afraid she'd get mad at me for having such low grades. My mother nearly ended up suing the school for violating disability laws. It wasn't until it was actually explained to me that teachers can't refuse IEP accommodations that it really dawned on me how fake the situation was. I spent an entire semester agonizing over the fact that I couldn't get my work done in time and thought I was an idiot because of what that teacher was telling me. Only silver lining of the situation is that it taught me I could fight for my accommodations and that if she'd hit the fan, my mom would be on my side come hell or high water. My second grade teacher was a total asshole, but only to me, for the sole reason that my mom, who also worked at the school district, took the job she was hoping to get and took it all out on me. In elementary school I was an extremely smart kid. I was doing 6th grade math and reading way above my age level and was going to skip a grade, and no, I'm not like this now. However, my jealous 2nd grade teacher decided to try and ruin my life because my mom took the job she wanted. The first day of school everyone picked where they would sit except for me. I was told I had to sit in the seat closest to her desk. I didn't know why. She constantly berated me in front of the whole class if I got a question wrong. When she was asking the whole class, she would say things like, now $me, why would you answer with something like that? Please think about your answers before you open your mouth. Now this was 2nd grade. We didn't really have grades, but you could still be failing a class and get held back because of it, and I almost got held back. She would constantly grade my tests significantly lower than I was used to, and at a point I got suspicious and started checking my tests with my friends and found they were putting the same answers, but I was getting the questions wrong. She basically told my parents I was an awful student, never paid attention in class. Well, I didn't, but I knew the material, never did my homework during parent-teacher conferences. My mom, who didn't realize she took her dream job, told her I wasn't allowed to play any video games, go out with friends, or anything unless I had above a certain grade in all of my classes. I'm sure you can guess my teacher kept a grade in one of my classes just below that threshold. The absolute kicker though was when I realized what a shitty person she was. We had to do a report about a dinosaur. I picked the chasmosaurs, basically a cooler triceratops, and I put my heart and soul into the project and worked on it really hard. The day it was due I turned it in. She told me to come to her room during recess, so I did, and she told me my project was absolutely horrible and ripped it up in front of me. I cried. TLDR 2nd grade teacher was an absolute dick at every turn because my mom took her dream job. My male high school drama teacher used to watch us getting changed. Important context, it was an all-girls school. So before each drama class, we change out of our uniforms into street clothes because he thought it made us more relaxed. At first he would go into his office, give us 5 to 10 minutes to change, and then come out and start the lesson. Over time he started to get more creepy. He would come out after just 1 minute and be like, "Oh, sorry ladies, I thought you had finished. I'll just wait here with my back turned." He would indeed turn his back, but then he would hold up a mirror to do his hair. We all knew he was just watching our reflections, but since we were all just 11 years old, nobody ever said anything to him, probably because it's hard as an 11-year-old to stand up to an adult. He got worse as that year progressed. At the back of the drama hall was a muslin cloth. For those that don't know, when you shine a light on muslin cloth, it goes see-through, and without a light shining on it, it obscures the view of whatever is behind it. Importantly though, from the other side you can see through the muslin cloth. So one day we were getting changed and someone noticed the cloth move, as though someone was walking behind it. We kind of ignored it, and then a few minutes later it moved again. One of the people in my class went behind the cloth and found our drama teacher watching us change. We couldn't see him because of the cloth. He could see us perfectly. Not surprisingly, he was gone before the year had ended. He told us that he had won a role on Sunset Beach. I saw a few episodes to see if he was on there and knew he was lying because this guy was super ugly and would have been out of place on this show. So yeah, it was faked up that this male pervert in his 50s or 60s was watching 11-year-olds getting changed. Ugh. Edit. Another one I just remembered. A male lecturer at university had an alcohol problem. He must have missed about 50% of the classes. The rest he would turn up to and say, "I'm so drunk, I can't be bothered to teach," or alternatively, "I'm really hungover. You can do what you want, but I'm going to nap." So of about 20 classes, we only got taught in about 4 of them at most. That's pretty messed up given how much a course costs. Worse, he got fired from the uni and managed to find himself a job in China as VP to a mining company. Last I heard he was a millionaire. Figures. Back when I was in 7th grade, was taking a US history class, and there was some dumb question about some battle in the American Revolution, and I said out loud to one of my buddies something to the effect of, "Did you know they used rockets back then?" I think I said it a bit too loud and the history teacher pointed me out and said, "Beware of traps. Did you say they used rockets back in the American Revolution? Don't you know rockets were invented much later?" And at the time, as a person who watched the History Channel, bought a lot of military history books, and generally read a lot about warfare from the past, I knew he was flat out wrong. So I tried to respond as well as a 13-year-old could, who was also bad at confrontation, being put on the spot, and public speaking with, "But, the Star-Spangled Banner mentions rockets, red glare, those are rockets." He responded with something along the lines of, "Well, those are rockets, but those aren't rockets in the sense of a weapon, those were like firecrackers." And then everyone laughed at me, and obviously firecrackers rockets that kill people. So I went back home, and I went to the internet, before Wikipedia was credible or very popular, and found specific instances of rockets used, then grabbed my military history books, and earmarked the pages of when the Chinese, Koreans, Middle Eastern people all used rockets as incendiary weapons for sieges in the 13th century. Then, I found the excerpt on the Battle of Fort McHenry/Baltimore, where it specifically states that the British had to use their rockets and mortars instead of cannons because of how far out they were, and tried to shell the fort with continuous rocket and mortar fire, and that the fire was so heavy and vast that Francis Scott Key decided to put it in the damn anthem. And then, instead of trying to prove that I was right to the teacher in class the next day, I just nodded to myself and said, "Told ya," and that was that. I know my buddies would joke around with me after that, because as a person who was passionate about military history, I did like to talk about it as a hobby/passion, but no one in my friend group/classmates could quite take me seriously on military affairs after the rocket incident. TLDR teacher said rockets didn't exist back in the American Revolution. Tried to say that was false, was told I'm an idiot, found out I was right, and said nothing about it. I had a teacher in 5th grade who was pretty terrible. I had ADHD, which made it harder for me to learn. All my teachers before had been very accommodating. She'd slam her hand on the desk every time my mind wandered, ignored me when I asked for help, and once pulled my chair from under me. If any kids missed homework or misbehaved, we'd have to write a paragraph stating that we were a disappointment to ourselves, our friends, and family. I hid or threw away the papers, so my mom wouldn't find them. For months I developed extreme anxiety, trying anything to stay home. I'd cry and scream, clinging to the door, and begging my mother not to make me go. There were also bullies that caused this, but that's another story. Eventually my mother found the papers I mentioned, and she was rightfully mortified. I told her everything, and she went to the school principal. According to her, he seemed to not care, saying he'd look into it, but of course never did. My therapist was also horrified at what was going on, and did everything she could to work with my mother to get me out of there. Thankfully I did get out, and spent the rest of my school years in public online school, and turned into a straight A student who ended high school with a 4.1 GPA, and started attending college classes at age 14. Oh yeah, I forgot. One of my classmates became suicidal because of it. He told me several times he wanted to kill himself. An 11-year-old having to deal with suicidal thoughts is horrible. I told his mother, who took it very seriously, but I lost contact with him shortly after I left the school. I hope he got help and is doing well. In 4th grade I had a teacher, call her Miss H, whose son was in the class with me. Their first day she makes a quick spiel about how he won't get treated specially CT. Halfway through the year, I fly across the country to attend my great aunt's funeral with the whole family. I'm gone a little over a week from school and managed to complete almost all the school work assigned over that missing week during the trip, except a few harder assignments. While I was away, I was given a lead speaking part in a class play, by default since I wasn't there to pick a different part and nobody volunteered for the scary lead role. My first day back at school and we are having a little dress rehearsal for the play. Needless to say I just froze when it came to my part. Frustrated by this, Mrs. H took me into the hallway and said something along the lines of, "I don't care how long you were away or why. You will not ruin this play and you will learn your lines immediately. I'm tired of hearing your excuses for not being caught up with your schoolwork." Do I make myself clear? Stunned and scared that an adult is towering over me and yelling at me through gritted teeth, I learned my lines real quick and was never comfortable around her since. Wasn't until late in high school I realized the connection, that her son was in the play and she cared way more about a perfect little play with her son than anything me or my family was going through. Complete cunt. In year 3 to year 5, don't know about before that, I wasn't there, we had two really weird and kinda messed up teachers. First one was the ELS teacher. Now, ELS stands for Early Learning Support Teacher, and that mainly means she helped people who couldn't speak English as their native language. Now, as an Australian, you'd think I'd be exempt from that class, right? Nope. She takes one listen at my accent and instantly takes me out of that class and puts me in hers. She gives me a list of all the words I'm not allowed to use, ranging from American spellings of words, because as an Aussie, I use British spelling anyways, to swear words that as a 8 to 9-year-old, I don't even know. She also told me off for being ambidextrous, saying that I should make up my damn mind about what hand to use and stick to it. Not that the second teacher was any better. American woman with some skewed views on politics that even you as 9-year-olds know are wrong and fanatically obsessed with the natural fallacy, so much to the point that she was the only one to ever disagree with the science teacher on things. Who was, in contrast to this, the most awesome science teacher I have ever met, and had some weird ideas on how class gets taught anyways. Year 6 rolls around, and ELS lady goes off because her husband died, and the English teacher seems to have dropped off the face of the earth, in my own 11-year-old view of the world. She's replaced with this guy that at the time I thought was worse, but now I just realize was just a hipster with an obsession with communism and Russia. But she wasn't gone forever. She comes back in year 10th teaching English again, and she's just as nuts. Blindly follows and agrees with everything Trump says without question, and thought that study some crazy Swede who claims to be the reincarnation of Anne Frank was better than studying Judaism of Mein Kampf for the Holocaust unit. And we still have her. TLDR, ESL lady refusing to accept Aussie English as a language, English teacher with some weird views of the world.